Hi, this is Christian Chase with Chase Real Estate and ChaseForeclosure.com. Hey, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the Bur strategy. This is something I have been doing long before it was called the Bur strategy. It was the buy, fix it up, get it rented, and then do a cash out refinance. And I started doing this in 1997. And I want to explain exactly how you as an investor should be tapping into the Bur strategy. It's something I'm a big believer in. About 70% of our investors buy, fix, and sell. 30% of our investors buy, fix, and hold. And I would say a majority of our investors are doing like a blend of both. So it's not like they're going one way or another. They tend to do a little bit of both. And so the Bur strategy, where I'm buying it, I'm rehabbing it, I'm renting it, and I'm refinancing it, is a great way to build wealth. One, you get cash flow off of properties, you get appreciation from properties, there's tax advantages that come along with owning these types of houses. So I encourage investors to utilize the Bur strategy, but I want to show you some of the pitfalls with having the Bur strategy as well. So doing this as long as I have, in 1997, I started buying rental properties, and I would acquire them. I would go in, buy the property, get it all fixed up. I'd always be buying distressed real estate, foreclosed, something under market. I never paid retail for a property. So what I would do is I would buy the property in a distressed state. So I'm buying it under market. I'm buying it for $100, and let's say it was worth $200,000, all fixed up, cleaned up, and needed $30,000 worth of renovation. So what I would do is I would buy the property, get in there, do my renovation on the property, get the property rented, and then once the property was rented, I would go back to my bank, and what I would do is I would cash out. But what I would always do is I would only cash out what I had into the property, my down payment and my rehab. I never went in and what I call is equity stripping, taking out all the equity. Now, I want to tell a little bit of a story of where I saw the Bur work and I saw the Bur not work for investors. Investors that went in and did the cash out refinance and then would do the equity strip. So in 2005 and 6, a lot of investors would go in, they would buy it, fix it up, get it rented, and then they would do the cash out refinance and they would take everything out of the property. So that property was left with nothing. So then we had in 2007, 8, 9, 10, we're all aware of that, our market ended up crashing essentially. So now those investors, an investor would call me in 2009 and say, Christian, hey, I'd like to sell my rental property. And I'm like, cool, we bought it here, it's worth here, and we put some renovation into the property. Yeah, the market has depreciated. We should be able to sell that property. But then I would come to find out that they had equity stripped it, so their mortgage was here, and what the value of the property was here. So that's where you got to be very, very careful as an investor, is there's programs that are out there that will allow you to take anything and everything out of a property. I would say only take out what you've got into it, and maybe you have to leave a little bit of money inside of a property. That's okay too. I mean, I always had a little bit tied up inside of some of the houses that I would purchase and then do my cash out refinances on. But a big thing is don't equity strip these properties, because that puts you in a very bad position. 2, don't buy retail real estate and you're not going to be able to do the Bur strategy. You need to be buying here and then getting the property, fixing it up, and then refinancing it because the value is up here, and then you're able to cash out. And most investors are able to cash out at 75%. So you are able to get out a majority of your money out of the property. And so that's a big deal for investors, is being able to get that cash. Because once you have that cash back in your hand, guess what? You can go out and then deploy that towards another property. And that's why I said I did this 68 times. My return on investment, as I said, is kind of like infinity to me, because I kept on taking the funds from this property, re-rolling it into the next property, taking the funds out of that one, and then re-rolling it into another one. Did it again and again and again. And I built up a huge portfolio of real estate doing that. Now, one of the things that I think you need to be conscious of, you need to be buying in these types of rental properties in good areas. So when an investor comes to me and says, hey, I went to a guru, they have a formula on how to buy real estate. If you come to me with a formula, I'm like, this is a real novice, okay? Because you don't know the markets and you don't know where to be buying real estate. So a formula, plugging a property into some formula that a guru in Arizona came up with, is not going to work. And what the strategy for me has always been when I'm buying these types of rental properties is I, one, want to be buying the properties in A, B locations. Maybe I'll touch into a C location, but I want to be buying in as good of an area as I possibly can. And I think that's easy to do if we're in the Chicagoland suburbs, where a majority of the property, all the properties I personally own, are throughout the suburbs. The big thing is that we're able to buy in the best area we can possibly buy in. Then two, and the reason why I want to be in that really, really good area is because when I move a tenant in, I don't want them to even be able to move laterally, and I don't want them to be able to move up out of my property. I want to get my tenant in and they look at that property as home. If they had to move out of my house, they would have to move into a lesser area, or they would have to move into something that would be an older property, whatever it may be. Once I get my tenant inside my property, they want to stay there, and that's buying area. And you can't put a formula to go, hey, this is an A or B area, and try to plug it in. You have to look at every property individually. So trying to plug a formula into the Bur strategy really doesn't work, okay? I mean, the only formula that you could use is, can I buy it and can I cash out and get my money back out? But you really got to be paying attention to the areas where you're buying the properties at, and that is first and foremost. I mean, they always say location, location, location. Well, darn it, that is a fact. You want to be buying in as good of a location as you can, because your tenants will stay long term. And I think that's a really, really important point, is we want long-term tenants, because when a tenant moves out, we have vacancy expenses, rehab expenses, rental costs. So there's so many things that go around with a tenant moving out of a property. Even if it's a cooperative tenant that's moving out, I don't want them moving out every year because they don't like the location. It's a D area, and they're like, oh, I don't feel safe. I don't like the neighborhood, or whatever it may be. I want to get in as good of an area as I possibly can, so the tenant makes that their home, and they will be there. I've had tenants in my properties for decades, and that is probably one of the best things. Those are great producing properties, and my tenants are paying down my mortgages that I had on those properties, and then you own those properties free and clear because the tenants ended up making all your payments for you. So I know you get that, but that's an important part. Is one, you really got to know the location of the property, and you're going to get a tenant that's going to stay inside the property. Now, one of the other things that I did when I was renting out houses is I used government programs. Now, there's different programs. You've heard of Section 8, that's a federal program. There's a state program called RHSP. That's another really good program. Those are guaranteed rents. And so when I first got into real estate, I got into real estate in 95. I bought my first rental property in 97. Well, at that point, as I started acquiring properties in 97 and 98, I was like, hey, Section 8, the federal program, makes a lot of sense for me because it's like insurance in a way. I'm getting insurance that the tenant is going to pay me every single month. And so I a lot of times hear investors say, well, I don't want to rent out a property on Section 8. Well, one, you can't say that. Two, I think it's one of the best programs that's out there because it's guaranteed rent. It's like you walk into a bank right now and want to get financing on a property, and you walk in and show the bank, hey, I've got 10 properties. They're all leased out through the Section 8 program. They look at you like you're gold because they know that all those rents are guaranteed, backed by the federal government. And so you have a lot of strength. So as you build your portfolio, the more guarantees you can offer a bank, the more they're going to keep lending to you. And it gets easier and easier if you're doing that and utilizing some of those programs. Now, that doesn't mean that every property that you have has to go Section 8 or be a traditional tenant. But I would say you may have a blend of Section 8, and those are guaranteed, and then I have traditional tenants that are out there. A big part of when you're renting out properties using those government programs is you have to be respectful of the tenant. And I think a lot of investors sometimes feel like, oh, hey, I'm renting this property out on the Section 8 program. I'm not going to treat the tenant like is equal to a traditional tenant because the government's paying the rent, the tenant isn't. Now that's completely false. And if you look at things that way, you're just setting yourself up for a complete failure by looking at it that way. Your tenant is your tenant. Wherever they're getting the funds from, it does not matter. You know that that direct deposit check from Section 8 is going into your bank account. That's something that's critical, and you want to make sure you've got that coming in. Your tenant, you need to take care of them. Treat them with respect. If the hot water heater goes out, respond to that within 24 hours. It's your level of respect is what you're going to get back from that tenant. So if you just say, oh, you know what, the hot water heater went out, I'll get around to it in a week. Just think about yourself having to take a shower, cold shower for the next week while you wait to get that fixed. You'd be frustrated, and so do the tenants. And then that's where your properties start to deteriorate and you have high tenant turnover. So making sure that you take care of your tenant like they are your client is how I look at it. My tenant is my client. I don't want to upset my client. I want to make my client happy. And that's what my tenants are to me, is they are like my clients. So if you look at tenants that way, specifically the Section 8 tenants, I think you're going to find a much greater success. And because it's all guaranteed money, I sleep very good at night. And as I buy additional properties, I acquire another home. And when I buy the next one, I'm like, well, hey, that one's all guaranteed. I can go on and take on this other one. So you're not sitting up in bed at night worrying, hey, do I have the money coming in on these properties? You know that you've got it there. So again, you may have a blend of properties, traditional tenants, Section 8, but I would encourage you to go both ways. So that's another important part. And in regards to the renovation on these properties, whenever you're renovating one of these properties, we're doing a rental rehab. So when we send a property out to you about a good deal, it likely will work as a rental property as well. The only thing that we send out is we send out a rehab scope based on reselling the property. So we typically are going to do a greater renovation on that house when we are reselling it than we are going to do if we're going to be renting it. Doesn't mean that we don't take care of the safe, sound, secure items. That is first and foremost the most important part about any property, whether you're selling it or you're renting it, is taking care of the safe, sound, secure, then throwing in the cosmetics. Well, on a rental property, I'm not going to throw in as many cosmetics. One, if I put in white shaker style cabinets in my property today, in 10 years from now, is white shaker style cabinets going to be popular? Probably not. Well, they've lasted a lot longer than I expected, but I just don't think that they're going to be the cabinets. So I may paint the existing cabinets, maybe shine up the cabinets that I have there. So my renovation is typically going to be lower. So when we send out that property, you get the high rehab scope, which is to resell it. Know that we can get the renovation team to give us the numbers on what is it going to take to get it into rentable condition. And always that would likely be less. So that's in regards to getting the property renovated. Then, to get the property rented, we have by far the best rental team. And I know my investors will agree on this item solely. Is Amanda is our lead leasing broker. And she's been working with me for the last 14 years. She is literally like a private investigator. And we use software that's able to do the background, credit, criminal checks. We use something also called Forewarn. We know what cars they've owned, everything about that potential tenant. And so it tells a very, very good story. And Amanda is a true expert at this. Now, Amanda charges 1 month's rent to get a property rented. I own a lot of real estate. I pay Amanda the 1 month's rent to rent out all my houses. I don't negotiate with her. I don't go, hey, Amanda, we work together. Give me a special deal. I want her to get paid every penny because, one, she gets me very, very good tenants. She gets me long-term tenants that want to stay. That's one of her questions that she's asking a tenant. How long do you want to live in the property? I mean, what are your goals? And that's something like a lot of landlords and other management companies, they don't ask the question, like, why are you renting here? Where are you planning on going in the future? And if they say, hey, I just need something for 12 months and I'm going to be jetting back out to Louisiana, well, is that really the tenant that we want? Somebody that's going to be out in a year? Because now I'm going to have vacancy, rehab, re-rental costs, all those things adding up. So having somebody like Amanda, a true professional, and when you've worked with her, our clients call me up all the time and are like, man, Amanda just knows her stuff. And she really, really does. This is what she does. She's our lead leasing broker and is a true expert. Thousands of properties is what she's renting. So she knows how to sniff out the bull that may be coming in on from some of the applications and things like that. So having a true professional on your side is important to do the rental. You can rent out the property yourself. I used to do it in the very beginning. To me, it was just very frustrating because tenants wouldn't show up, and then I was doing the credit checks and the background checks and all those things. And I really just said, hey, it's worth for me to pay somebody to do that. Let me delegate to a true pro. In my entire career, I've only had to evict one tenant. And it wasn't one that Amanda put in my property. It was one that I put in my property. So I will go on and say Amanda is a great resource. You can call her, ask her questions about a property. She's a great resource. I think you need to tap into those things. So knowing that you've got a leasing team that really knows what they're doing is critical. But again, all the background checks, credit checks, criminal checks, writes up the leases, exchanges the keys, collects first month's rent, 1 month security deposit, delivers that all to you. And then on top of that, we do have property management with our firm. Now out of our Mokina office, we have Gino Pachola is the managing broker of our Mokina office. He is also the property manager for all of our properties. So that's not something that's done out of our Naperville location. It's done out of our Mokina location. And a true property manager and is really looking out for your best interest. You have to think of it this way. If you guys have good success doing this, guess what you're doing? You're buying more properties from us again. And then what you're doing, you're getting them rented. You're getting them property managed. And rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Our clients don't buy 1 or 2 houses. Some of our clients have 50 and 60 homes in property management with us. So it's a win-win for both of us, and we want to make sure we're taking care of you. And having property management and somebody that you can trust and you know is looking out for your best interest and the best interest of the property, I think is a very, very important part of the entire process. So having property management. Again, 10% is the fee if you have like 1, 2, 3 properties. It's 10% of the monthly rent is what property management charges. Can you do property management yourself? Absolutely. I did it for years. My wife and I would do the management of our properties, and we would just oversee everything. And the renovation team that went in, I bought the home. I had a renovation team go in and do the rental rehab. And then the tenant calls me 3 months later. I can have Bob go back out there and do some of the fix-ups at the property if there's a hot water heater that goes out or whatever it may be. So knowing that the resources are there and you can easily find all those resources right on our website on Chase Foreclosure under the tab Crew, you can order just about anything you could possibly need for your property right smack dab there on our website. So it's a great resource. Again, that's the Crew tab. So I encourage you to check that out, but you can do your own property management. But at a certain point, you're not going to be able to do property management. So those are some things that I would recommend that you start to consider is, hey, I've got 5 properties or 10 properties. I'm not able to go out there and visit the home. I'm not raising the rents on the property. That's a problem. A property manager's supposed to be checking in on the property, also encouraging rent increases, and that's where a lot of investors miss out is if they're managing it themselves, they're not looking at the house often enough. And 2, they're not asking for rent increases. You're like, I don't want to rock the boat. I got a good tenant. You need to be asking for rent increases every single year. Maybe it's a small amount, $30, $40 every year, but that adds up to real dollars over the next 10 years. So that's something a property manager is doing on a regular basis, and they're up to date on what leases and things like that need to be used, so you're using the proper documentation. In the Chicagoland area, there's different regulations depending on what area the property is located in. So having a property manager that's in place, I think is absolutely important. But can you manage properties yourself? Absolutely you can. It's not necessary, but at a point, you're going to need to tap into a true property manager. So that. Then it comes down to the refinance. We've got to refinance this property. Now, in-house at our Naperville location, we have Bob Green and Brian are lenders that will do the cash out refinances for our investors. So yes, they'll make a loan for you to buy the property. They can also do the cash out refinance for you as well. So it's kind of one-stop shop. It's like you don't have to keep turning in paperwork again and again. You turned in paperwork when you were buying properties. You're qualified with them. Then once you want to do the refinance, you're already qualified. Maybe you have to update a couple pieces of paperwork. So the process becomes very streamlined. So having this in place, I put all these pieces in place a long time ago because I knew I didn't, one, want to do everything. Two, I wanted to be able to delegate certain things out to our clients and or to our providers. I don't want to have to try to do all of this stuff. So on the refinance end of it, they will refinance the value of the property, the new value of the property after the renovation. Or really, I even say the renovation. A lot of properties that are these rentals, I'm sometimes doing very, very little work. It's just under market. Maybe I painted it, carpeted it, and that was it. I can go back out and do my cash out refinance because they're going to be looking at the comparable sales that have sold in that area a couple months after you purchased it. You're going to be able to cash out, and a majority of the time, you're going to be able to cash out just about everything. Sometimes you'll leave a little bit of money inside of a property. When you have the opportunity to cash out more, please don't do it. I've only seen that be the worst thing for an investor is equity stripping the property. And I know I keep repeating it because in 2007, 8, 9, 10, I was watching that happening all the time. And it was frustrating for me because I'm like, hey, we bought the property for $100,000. It was worth $200,000 at the time. We put $30,000 in renovation. You know, the value of our properties didn't drop. Like if you bought it for $100 and it was worth $200,000, it didn't drop below $100,000. It didn't drop down to $130,000. It may have dropped, you know, in most of our areas, it was around 20% is what the values dropped. Hey, we were totally protected because we bought these properties here and they were worth here. We could get, I didn't sell anything during that time, but we could get out of our properties because we bought all of these properties right. Even after we cashed out refinanced, we could get out. But the investors that took out everything and then some, that was the investors that were in a tight spot. And it was kind of like, we got to ride this whole thing out, which is fine. But I would prefer investors are protecting themselves by buying, one, in those good locations. Two, when you buy in a good location, you're going to have a long-term tenant living inside the property. And, you know, if you needed to sell for some reason, one, it's in a good location, you still have equity inside the property where you could sell the property if you had to. And there's been one occasion here on a property I own, Aurora, right really down the street from where my office is at. I had a property and I moved a tenant in, and the next door neighbor worked for the city. They didn't like that I had a tenant living inside the property, so they made my life miserable by getting fines for a Snickers wrapper showing up on the lawn and for that and that. So my tenant lived there for a year. I was like to the tenant, sorry, I'm going to sell this property. I just didn't want to have to deal with the next door neighbor. Took my funds out, made my profit, moved on, rolled that money into another property. So it's getting into the property and then having the ability to get back out. So if it's in a good location, you're good there. And if I would say that if it's the location is going to be number one, two, you've got to have the equity to be able to get back out of that property as well. So I'm a big believer in the Bur strategy. It's something, like I said, I've implemented into my own portfolio, and I think investors should do the same, but we have to look at every property individually. And so the taxes come into play, the area, location, AB, location, what's the style, the age of certain items on the property, when are we going to have to replace the roof? When are we going to have to replace siding and windows and all those things? Are we going to have to do that now, or are we going to have to do that in 20 years from now? So to put a formula together, very, very difficult to do. I can assure you, I worked with many hedge funds in 2010, 11, and 12, and they came up with these awesome spreadsheets. I mean, these guys, they're smart guys. There's no question, guys and gals. They're very, very smart. And when they came into our office and they showed me the spreadsheet, and I would kind of smile at the time and say, oh yeah, this all really looks good on paper, but how does this actually translate into the real world? And that's where they started to realize, hey, our strategy of buying properties that were C, Ds, and F areas, they switched that up very quickly once they realized, and when I say quickly, 2 to 3 years it took them, and I was proposing to them they shouldn't even be buying in those areas at that particular time, because I know they're gonna end up selling it because of the rehab, re-rental, vacancy costs, everything associated with it. So somebody very, very smart, very, very smart hedge funds can come up with great ideas, and it looks great on paper, and their formula was spectacular, but unfortunately the formula is on paper and it doesn't really translate into the real world. So what I'm going to do is guide you to the right properties, the stuff that I own, the type of properties that I own, and I encourage our investors to buy, and making sure that we have an investment that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you go to sell that property, you've really got something that's left over that's a nice sizable chunk, so you have a true investment. So as always, you can always reach out to me. I'm glad to talk about this and what I've done in the past, and there's so much more to it, but I wanted to get out and kind of explain my approach to the Bur strategy. And check out our website, chaseforeclosure.com. I've got tons of information on there as well. And we have our rental website called chaserental.com, where you can get a little bit more information. What is kind of the tenancy on our end of things? So as always, again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you shortly.